is Brandon Gerdick, and today I'll be refuting Carol Ma's speech, Clement Black's speech, where her main claim is that violence in video games and youth violence are completely unrelated. Her secondary claims are that there are flaws in studies that link video games to violence. 2, there are numerous scientific studies that argue against the impact of video games and violence. And 3, video games decrease crime rates. My response to her first secondary claim is that, depending on the scientists running the study and determining whether or not their expertise makes their claim valid or not. From Anderson and Bushman, from BBC.com, they said that every theoretical prediction derived from prior research and from general aggression model, which was supported by the meta-analysis of currently available research on violent video games, these supported predictions were that exposure to violent video games is positively associated with heightened levels of aggression in young adults and children. 46% of coded participants were under 18. Now that the US, 56% of kids play, well not 56%, sorry. 86% of kids play video games, and 20% of those video games are non-violent. In her secondary claim, she states that there are numerous scientific studies that argue against the impact. And my counter to that is that the research demonstrates a consistent relation between violent video game use and increases in aggressive behavior. Aggressive cognitions and aggressive affect and decrease in pro-social behavior, empathy, and sensitivity to aggression, says the American Psychological Association. It is the accumulation of risk factors that tends to lead to aggressive or violent behavior. The research reviewed here demonstrates that violent video games use is one such risk factor, said the same people. An example is the shooter from Munich, Germany. He was at the age of 18, and study shows that he was a very popular fan of the game GTA. After searching his house, they found that after he played these games, he started taking down notes of how the game relates to how he could possibly use it against his own tactics. Her third claim is video games decrease crime rates, and one of her statements was during the period 1994 to 2004, video games rates significantly increased, while crime rates significantly decreased. Today, a good amount of games involve the player shooting either a cop, military personnel, or innocent bystander as part of the objective, says CNN. Therefore, kids today are exposed to games such as GTA, Call of Duty, Gears of War, and etc., which are pretty violent and gory games, leading to aggression, especially when the parent decides it's time to turn off the video game. So therefore, the video game itself is the fact that the parent is telling their child to turn off the video game and the child doesn't want to listen. Therefore, the child will get mad and cause aggressive behavior. And my final statement is that most kids today, parents don't control the access to violent video games. They just let them do what they want to make them happy. Happy is the message.
All right, Brandon, there's a good start labeling the advocate's claims and secondary claims. You go immediately with a counterclaim on the first point, suggesting research, the aggregate, excuse me, the aggregate research suggests that there is a relationship, that the models that you're looking at include a variety of studies, and they all seem to find a significant relationship. You don't specifically talk about the evidence that the advocate presented or any of the particular criticisms that they suggested. It did sound at one point when you were talking about the percentage of people in the study who were under 18, like that was an attempt to respond to an argument that had been presented in the advocate's claim, but it's not directly correlated. I'm not sure that they made an argument about that, and so that piece of information, I don't know how useful it is. Your statistic about the number of kids who play versus the number who are playing nonviolent video games, it's interesting information, but I'm not sure what inference I'm supposed to draw from it. So I think you need to give us a little bit more of an explanation about how we're supposed to use that information. And again, I do think that you need to contrast it a little bit more clearly to the evidence that the advocate is using. On the second point, basically, this is the same argument. In essence, you're saying we need to trust the research that's out there, and especially the collective wisdom of people who are doing this. And you cite the APA, which I think is a good standard to go by. So the American Psychological Association reaches the conclusion that this is the case. And for example, I think you could kind of subsume some of the arguments that the advocate presented here on their studies and say, the APA would have considered all of the research, and their overall assessment is that it does have, it is a risk factor. Now, saying that it's a risk factor doesn't necessarily mean that it's a causality, but you want to put it into context. The advocate is saying it has basically no relationship, or it's unconnected, and your argument isn't that it's causing this kind of violence, but it is one of the many factors that contribute to that, and I think that that would make your argument a little bit stronger if you kind of put it into that sort of context. And then the third point, you never talk directly about the rates of crime or the rates of video games. Your information basically talks about the number of games, or not even the number of games, but the familiarity in games of shooting cops, soldiers, innocent bystanders. You mentioned several examples of games that do that sort of thing. I think this would have been a good place to have your Munich example, your Munich shooting guy that you mentioned. I know that you mentioned them someplace. I guess it was on the second point. You know, I think that point might have fit better on this particular issue, going along with the argument that you're making that says that they're all exposed to these kinds of things. And then here's an example of a follow-up. The thing about the parents, the kids get aggressive with their parents because they're being told to turn it off. That's, you know what, if you were making that argument, that sounds a little bit like a cop-out. I think the advocate would say, yeah, that's not the kind of violence that anybody's worried about, that some kid gets pissed off at their parents because they tell them to turn off their video games. That's not the sort of thing that we're really talking about, and they might be willing to concede that particular point. I do think that the exit could use a little bit more of a summary, and like I said, I think you need more contrast to the way the advocate argued their points, although I did like some of the research that you had, and specifically like I said, the kind of the collective information that you're presenting. All right, thank you.